the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
This is HBR News number 226. South Korea takes the red pill. Jordan Peterson checks into rehab, where we reflect on the stories of the week and give it the Badger treatment. Uhuru, y'all, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. I'm your host, Brian, and I am joined by, as always, my esteemed panelists, Hannah and the two mics. We have a great show lined up for you guys today, so please be sure to continue the conversations both in the chat as well as the comment section. On this week's HBR News Show, we'll be talking about the honks of the week, which include more on the Jonathan Vanderhagen story, or the Vanderhagen saga, as you might want to think of it. South Korea's growing anti-feminist and men's movement. Jordan B. Peterson checks himself into rehab after his wife falls very, very ill, and more. So stick around, it's going to be a good time. And be sure to join us afterwards for the patron-only after show. So you guys might see that I'm displaying it right here. Allow me to share my screen with my co-panelists so that they also can see what I'm showing people. I thought I would try something different this week. And I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I think it should be interesting either way. We're going to be looking at a podcast. Well, listening to a podcast, really? I mean, there's nothing to look at when it comes to podcasts. From our friends over at Slate. The podcast, I think it's from a sub page called Man Up. Yeah, that was weird. All right. Yeah, it should be good. So we're looking at, I apologize, guys. There was a brief kerfuffle with the OBS. Anyway, so for the after show, we're going to be looking at this podcast, or listening to this podcast from Slate, entitled Man Up. It's I think that's the series. It's called Man Up, and the name of the podcast is The Real Threat of Video Games. White supremacists see male gamers as recruits. What does this say about gamer culture? Now, I don't know what is going to be in this podcast, but it sounds like it's going to be really enlightening. So I thought we would give that a listen, maybe add some commentary, and I think it could be at the very least, it'll be interesting. So why not dive in? So if you guys would like to participate in the after shows, either as an audience member or a participant, please consider becoming a Badger yourself by going to www.feedthebadger.com and starting a monthly subscription. And if you don't want to wake up one morning to find yourself unable to find our content because YouTube finally dropped the axe on our channels, please go to badgerfeed.com. That's badgerfeed.com. I apologize for the momentary hiccup, like I said. So the rest of you guys are here, right?
Yeah, we're here.
All right, cool. I didn't lose anyone else. All right. So let's get into the stories, because we have a few that we're going to be digging into. So let's start with following up on the Jonathan Vanderhagen story. So I will give you guys a little bit of that. Andrew Rachel Rancilio, Judge Rachel Rancilio of Macomb County, Michigan, testified at a trial that she was scared and that she was, quote, afraid something bad was going to happen to myself or my children, end quote. Jonathan Vanderhagen had his son...
Can I just interrupt really quick to say, oh, the irony?
Yeah, that a judge would say that?
That this judge would say that.
Yes, exactly. So she said, Jonathan Vanderhagen, the story of Jonathan Vanderhagen, this is the third time we've talked about this. He had his son taken away from him during a divorce proceeding with his wife. His wife was awarded full custody of the child. 2 years later, the child was found to be dead. He was killed. Vanderhagen and his lawyer had warned the court that the child would be put in harm's way if his wife was awarded full custody, but they gave the woman full custody anyway. After the death of his son, Vanderhagen took to Facebook to vent his frustrations. Rancilio was scared of one particular post saying, quote, this was the post that she was afraid from, Dada back to digging, and you best believe I'm gonna dig up all the skeletons in this court's closet, end quote, which is something that we brought up on a previous show. He was holding a shovel with RR on the handle and a shirt that says the misuse of public power by elected politician or appointed civil servant for private gain. Rancilio testified that, quote, I thought he was going to kill me and bury me after he was done. She claimed that his posts against her started escalating and became directed at other members of her family, including her niece and father. She says that she also received death threats, including calls to her chambers at the courthouse. Now, if you guys don't know, I think last week we talked about this. Vanderhagen was arrested for, I think that was he was charged with the malicious use of telecommunication services for Facebook posts that he directed at the family court and the judge Rachel Rancilio. So we know that he was arrested, but as it turns out, he was found not guilty. The jury returned that verdict in just 26 minutes. So a little bit of justice for Mr. Vanderhagen.
Quick reminder, before they can do anything else, they have to elect a foreman. So that 26 minutes wasn't deliberation. They actually had like administrative things they had to do too, and it all took place in 26 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a little bit of good news there. Does anybody have any additional thoughts on this story?
How
Just
did
that
this
you have
woman
to be
become
flat
a
out.
judge?
Yeah. You have to be flat out stupid to see somebody say they're going to dig up the skeletons in your closet and translate that into, he's going to kill me.
Yes, no, absolutely. That to make it, well, essentially it's like, how do you craft the threat narrative around a guy that's threatening to dig up the skeletons in your closet, unless of course you have skeletons in your closet, but we don't know. That's neither here nor there. So, but yes, justice for Vanderhagen. That's all I can say. And remember, he still has there's still I think there's a GoFundMe. If you want to support him, I showed a link to it last week on a show. So if you want to help out Vanderhagen, I'm not really. Do you ever find out how sort of legit that is? Now that I think about it, I'm not really sure. So you might want to, maybe investigate a little bit. But at the very least, I guess take some pleasure in knowing that, despite the fact that he lost his son to his ex-wife, and I mean lost his son, they weren't able to like imprison him for criticizing the courts, which is essentially what he was being charged with. So
I would be very careful because I just plugged Jonathan Vanderhagen and GoFundMe into Google, and I'm receiving no less than 3 completely separate GoFundMes, and I'm kind of doubting all of these can possibly be legit.
yeah.
No, they probably didn't all contact him. There's probably people who think that they can just do a GoFundMe and then find the person and give them the money. But the thing is, you really shouldn't be raising money in someone's name unless you've talked to them or people representing them and have their approval. GoFundMe really needs to do a better job of confirming stuff like that too.
I do see 2 of them are by the same person, Christina Mary Jason. One is on behalf of Jonathan Vanderhagen. The other one is by the same person on behalf of Deborah Vanderhagen. And then the third one is just someone named Joseph Gray. So, again, be careful. Vet what you're doing out there before you start tossing money someone's way.
Yeah, I wonder who Deborah is, whether Deborah Vanderhagen is the mother or if she is another family member. I guess there's one other thing I would want to point out about this, because the judge made claims about this escalating and involving other members of her family. It took place on Facebook. So it's entirely possible that this guy made posts, and if they were posted on the judge's profile or to as comments in response to things that were on her profile, that her family members might have responded to the posts, and so they would be involved. And if they did respond to the posts, he's not barred from answering their responses. It's not threatening if he does answer their responses. It's only threatening if he says, I am going to do X to you, and X happens to be a violent thing. So a lot of this sounds like damseling to me. And it also sounds like this guy took his grief, you know, as most people do in some way or another, too far if they don't have somebody to watch out for them. When you're dealing with the loss of somebody that close to you, I hope nobody that doesn't already know what it's like in our audience to lose someone as close as your child or your sibling or somebody that you love that much. And someone who is younger than you like that, it's horrible. For somebody to take it too far isn't exactly hard. And if they don't have a support network, or their support network isn't able to predict what they may or may not do, this kind of thing is going to happen. Doesn't mean this guy's dangerous. It means that he is really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And for the judge to do this was not just a minor abuse of power. She really should be disbarred. She should be disbarred for having put the child in jeopardy in the first place. But she really should be disbarred for having attacked the person who was grieving over his venting in public about her bad decision. That's a horrible abuse of power. Oh, yeah, I accidentally got your kid killed, but you're not allowed to say anything about it. Go to jail. Like, I can't tell you guys how much that pisses me off.
Yeah. No,
Deborah Vanderhagen. Deborah Vanderhagen, by the way, is the grandmother of Jonathan Vanderhagen's
If
son.
there's not an apostrophe in that, it's Deborah. Like Debbie Deborah.
Okay.
So yeah, okay.
It's Debbie is spelled Deborah. Is
that how it's spelled?
Yeah.
No, I mean I'm asking Mike J if that's how the name is spelled.
Yeah, Deborah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Deborah Vanderhagen is the grandmother of the child of Jonathan Vanderhagen. So basically Jonathan's mother, I guess? Maybe?
I'm assuming
maybe
as much.
She's been paying his legal bills.
Yeah, possibly. Well, nonetheless, I guess that they're I don't know. I mean, it's just when I first heard that, we did the story on this guy getting arrested for using abusive, malicious use of telecommunications services, I thought, what the hell country is this that we live in? But I'm glad that they were able to just like take this accusation and throw it in the trash where it belongs. Because there are much, much larger things, at stake here, things going on, like the death of a child. And I'm sure there is a grave misuse of power, and this should probably be investigated. But just like a judge acting threatened by the fact that a man who is, as Hannah said and pointed out, badly hurt by the fact that he lost his child, and I couldn't imagine what that must feel like. I'm sure that is some very, very profound pain. The fact that he would want
like getting hit in the face with a gravestone.
Yeah.
Grave misuse of power.
Yeah, exactly. Why wouldn't you want justice? Like just not getting, not going to prison for using Facebook, which I guess is like, that's where all the Nazis communicate with each other. Not getting arrested for using Facebook to talk about your problems and your suspicions of corruption and a misuse of power in the court system that's the bare minimum of justice. That's like something we shouldn't even be talking about. Instead, we should be looking at what's going on, that this woman who the lawyer and the plaintiff, Mr. Vanderhagen, warned against like leaving the child with, and yet they ruled in favor of the mother anyway. what's going on there. That's where it really needs to be looked at and talked about. So, but I still thought you guys should know what's going on with the situation.
Kind of wonder. I mean, with the Brock Turner case, which was not as cut and dried as feminists made it out to be. I mean, in fact, there's information that I've learned from it recently. One of the things I didn't know was that he had 6 character witnesses whose testimony was excluded from the case, and that was one of the reasons why the jury didn't believe that his testimony that he had gotten consent earlier was not true. You know, that they didn't believe that it was true. But yeah, that case was not cut and dried. Feminists protested until the judge was removed from the bench, and then they continued to pursue and stalk the judge even after the case was done, just because he didn't give Turner a longer sentence, right? Not because he let him off in some way or another, but because after everything, he believed that statement, and he sentenced him to a shorter sentence than they felt was appropriate for a higher crime than the one he was convicted of. And they went ballistic over that. The community he came back to after he got out is in the Dayton metro area. And they showed up here in the Dayton metro area with guns to protest his return home. Like the community was going to do something about it. And this is insane, right? So where are they now? Here's a judge whose actions are at fault for the death of a child, and they have nothing to say. And then when the other parent of that child, the dad, is grieving and going through all that pain, and he lashes out at the person who is at fault for his child's death, the person who had control over whether that child was in that position or not, whether that child was made vulnerable like that or not. And she abuses her power, by jailing him for speaking out. Not one word. I haven't heard a single word from any feminist about how bad that was and what should happen to that judge. They don't give a shit.
Yep. All silence. Okay, so well, we're just gonna move on from here and get to the next story. So guys, if you have any thoughts on this story, please leave us a comment below, and yeah, just give us your thoughts. So we're gonna move on to the next story, which is another follow-up from a story that we did a while back. So this is an update on a story we've covered in the past. In 2017, Michelle Carter, 22 years old, was convicted of involuntary manslaughter for encouraging her boyfriend to commit suicide through dozens of texts and phone calls. Her boyfriend, 18-year-old Conrad Roy III, committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning his pickup truck. According to prosecutors, Roy III briefly got out of the carbon monoxide truck to phone Carter, having second thoughts, and was told to get back in his vehicle. Yes. She also sent texts the day he died saying, quote, "The time is right and you are ready. Just do it, babe." And also, quote, "You can't think about it. You just have to do it. You said you were going to do it. Like I don't get why you aren't." End quote. According to police, Carter also misled family and friends before Roy III's death, telling him that he had gone, or telling them, rather, he had gone missing.
By the way, this would be a good question for like a mid-term paper for anyone who's interested in freedom of speech. Does this count under the umbrella of free speech? Now there are more objectively correct answers than others, so do have a ponder.
Carter is reportedly being released from prison early despite being recently denied parole. She has served 7 months in her 15-month sentence that started in February after the Massachusetts Supreme Court agreed with the lower court's guilty verdict. She is set to be released on March 13th instead of May 5th. On denying parole, the Massachusetts Parole Board wrote the following, quote, "The board is troubled that Miss Carter is not only encouraged Conrad Roy III to take his own life, but she actively prevented others from intervening in his suicide. Miss Carter's self-serving statements and behavior leading up to and after his suicide appear to be irrational and lacked sincerity. From Fox News, quote, her attorneys appealed the case a second time to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing that her messages were protected under the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech. All right. So just to follow up on, a story that we started before, it is really tragic. It's I don't know. I mean, it's just a sad story. And she was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. People are asking what she was charged with. So clearly this was this Conrad Roy was not in a good place, and this was probably the worst kind of person to have around. So, but anyway, I want to leave it to the panelists if you guys have any thoughts on this story.
The Reverend Jim Jones. I mean, to what degree was he responsible for everyone who drank the Kool-Aid? And you just divide that situation by the number of people, and you not have the same thing. I'm drawing you all towards the somewhat more objective answers. And that this is, I don't think I would cover this under freedom of speech. I would love to hear opposing opinions, but I don't think I'm going to hear any tonight.
No, there's some commonalities between this and Jim Jones that people don't realize. A lot of people aren't really familiar with that mass suicide. It wasn't entirely a mass suicide. And if you look up an article 40 years after the Jonestown Massacre, Jim Jones' surviving sons, on what they think, oh, that's not the right one. There is an article referring to the Jonestown Massacre that describes a scene of people being having the Kool-Aid forced down their throats. So there were people that drank the Kool-Aid voluntarily, and there were people that drank it at gunpoint. There were people who were forced to drink it, and there was a gunfight. So like it wasn't just a cut and dried incident, I guess you can say. There it is. It's in the Huffington Post, I think, the Jonestown Massacre, and there's a few different stories there. You'll see the Jonestown Massacre, history's largest massacre, and all that's interesting. There's a Britannica.com article on it too, but I think this one is the one that the Jonestown Massacre article in the Huffington Post is the one that explains that it wasn't just a mass suicide. And this situation wasn't just a suicide either. Now, this guy wasn't held at gunpoint, but he had somebody who knew his situation, who had been essentially grooming him for this, knowing that he was already partway there. It's a lot like the question of if you take an 8-year-old who has already been molested and is already aware of sex, and you groom them and they agree to whatever you do, it's still child molestation. It's still evil, right? And it's still an attack on that person's vulnerability specifically. Well, if you take someone who's suicidal and you start encouraging them after they're already in the most vulnerable mental state they can be in terms of suicide risk, it's the same thing. It is just as evil, and it is just as predatory. It's just the same as doing that to the child. The only difference is that an older person, an adult, has a slim chance of going, this person is taking advantage of me, this is wrong. And that chance becomes slimmer the more deep they fall into that depression, and the more despondent and the more worthless they're made to feel by this person's words. And as far as free speech is concerned, like, you have to be familiar with the amendment. It doesn't say that your speech being free is a get out of responsibility card for any results of the things that you have said. It just says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble. So you can say anything you want. But if what you have said creates consequences, real world consequences, then you're accountable for them. That's your fault. Just the same as you have the right to own a gun and you have the right to hunt on your property if you're out in the woods, if you are outside of a city limit. You have the legal right to do that. There's not a law against it necessarily unless you're in a place that has one. So you could be well within the law, but if you're careless and you shoot in a direction that there's residences and somebody gets hit by the bullet that you fired, you're still liable. Even if you were legally allowed to be there, even if you were legally allowed to be hunting, even if you were in a place where you were legally allowed to discharge your firearm, if you shoot somebody with it, you're still liable. And so I guess I would say it's the same thing with shooting your mouth off at somebody who is suicidal. Does it mean that you can't criticize people? Does it mean that you should be banned from social media for being rude? Does it mean that cussing should be banned under the laws and stuff like? No, not necessarily. None of that is supported by that. It just means that if you engage in a pattern of harassing speech or persuasive speech and you cause somebody's death because of that, you're responsible.
I wonder what place Conrad Roy was in that he was prone to being convinced that suicide was the answer and didn't. I mean, I don't know, but apparently he followed through on it. Even when he had second thoughts and she said, "Get back in the car, finish it. I thought you intended on finishing this. You said you were going to do it. Like, I don't get why you aren't doing it." And that he would get back in the car and continue to commit suicide. Like, this is the thing that that interests me the most out of this story, to be honest. I mean, there are evil people that like to see how much power they can have over others, and obviously we can say a lot about Miss Carter and how messed up she is, but I wonder what kind of life did Conrad Roy have? Like, what was he on any medications? Like, did he have suicidal urges in the past? Like, what's his history look like? This kind of thing. Because I think
from what I read, yes, to both of those, he had depression. He'd had suicidal thoughts in the past. He'd expressed them to her in the past and other people. So he was in treatment for depression.
Yeah, my understanding is that she knew that he was suicidal, and for her, this was kind of like a power trip. Like, let me see if I can drive him to suicide. Because I heard, okay, this is just what I heard, because I haven't talked about the story in a while. I heard that she bragged to her friends about it afterwards. Like, look what I was able to get this kid to do. And there is a bit.
The really creepy thing that she did at first was pretend to be worried that he was missing, and she didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah, she misled the parents, right? She didn't Conrad's parents didn't know that he was doing this, and she kind of like played dumb.
Just like basically. The murderer that actively participates in the search for the body.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, there's lots we can say about Carter, but I guess, I think that there are Conrad Roys all over the world that, have had suicidal thoughts, and they're in this dark place, and someone predatory like Carter could come along and put them in a worse place. And I guess this is the thing that I'm left thinking about. These are my final impressions from this story. So.
It does create a vulnerability. And I wonder how many men in bad marriages that have killed themselves to get out of that bad marriage have experienced that without there being a text message record of it. Being married to someone like her. I mean, if you look on the Shrink for Men .web, it's shrink SHRINK #4 men. The website, and I can't remember this .com. I think it is .com. But I'm gonna look just to make sure I don't send you somewhere else. because I'm sure it's shrinkformen.com, and then just look in the index. You will find all kinds of, in his own words, stories about men who have been in relationships with women who would behave like this. Women with borderline personality disorder, women who are narcissistic, women who are sociopaths or psychopaths, and gotten out of those relationships. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are men who have committed suicide as a result of this exact kind of behavior, and nobody knows because there was nobody there to hear it but the man, and there's no record of what was said.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. Give us your thoughts on this. Definitely check out shrinkformen.com. That's a person I've been trying to get on the show for a long time too, as a guest. The woman who runs that website. She used to like be a lot more involved in this stuff, but anyway, I got a couple super chats, and then we'll move on to the next story. Sephiroth 6839 gives us $1.99 and says can't incite violence to himself in this case. Hoki Bukisa gives us $5 and says, nah, no matter how messed up she is, I ain't willing to say that what she did should be punishable. I tell people to go play in traffic all the time. All right.
There is no comparison between a one-liner and a pattern like that. Like, if you were to follow someone down the street that you knew was suicidal and you knew was in treatment for it and you knew was on medication for it, and get in their face and start shouting, no, get out there now, then you might have a comparison. If you happen to be in a relationship with them and you were somebody that they trusted and you were part of their support network and you did that, then you'd have a comparison.
And then after 5 or 6 cars passes and they're like, I'm not down with this, I'm getting back on the street. You stand there and go, no, you get back out there in the traffic.
Like there's a lot of comedians who like to talk about suicide in this semi sort of is he even serious sort of way. Because a lot of comedians do have this sort of, like a lot of memers have this sort of theme of I'm going to kill myself, and a lot of them, even like Doug Stanhope's one of my favorites. He even has death pools and things, and like has whole routines about how original ways to kill yourself and stuff. And it works through the medium of a comedian and such, because it gets you to think about it without doing it. But when it's a close personal friend who's almost acting like a personal trainer to actually get you to do it, like, that's where it goes beyond the joke. That's where it goes beyond the thing that the entertainers do, because that's when you're in a position of personal responsibility with that person in your life, and that's neither the time nor the place to exercise that kind of sense of humor. On the off chance that there might be the kind of person who takes it too seriously, or is taking things too seriously at that point, and might just do it when it's not really a good decision for them to do it.
Yeah. I have another super chat, and then we're going to move on, okay? Hoki Bukisa gives us another $5, sort of responding. He says, and consider maybe she thought he was just an attention Hua Zero Re and was calling his bluff. Who knows? Could be more context.
Not with telling him to get back in the car. You know, if she had stopped at him getting scared and getting out and said something along the lines of, see, you should never try this again, this isn't what you want to do, then I could buy that. But I can't go with that when she told him to get back in and then covered it up. Like that, no, that's deliberate.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for the conversation on this. Please leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about this story. It is really tragic, and I don't know. It's something we talked about before, but let us know what you guys' thoughts are, and maybe cogitate over Dr. Random Cam's comments about free speech. But in the meantime, though, we're gonna move on to something
Cogitate.
Cogitate, marinate.
I don't know if that's what you said, but you just coined the word cogitate.
Oh, cogitate. Yes, cogitate over
That
that.
needs to be a thing.
Bollocks to all of this.
In the meantime, though, we're going to be talking about something that I find pretty interesting. This is South Korea getting woke. So, Mr. J, if you could please.
Yes, I will, Brian. So, South Korean males are becoming increasingly opposed to feminism. Over 50% of men in their 20s identify as anti-feminist, and 55% do not support #MeToo.
That's a lot, by
Quote,
the way. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think you're muted now.
Yeah, no, I had to. Yeah, we're good now. I've just got to remember the mic situation. It's kind of weird here. So, quote, feminism is no longer about gender equality. It is gender discrimination, and its manner is violent and hateful, end quote, stated Moon Sung-ho, leader of an anti-feminist group called Dang Dang We, at a panel discussion at South Korean's National Assembly, which I guess is like their parliament, basically. Feminism grew rapidly in South Korea following the 2016 murder of a young woman in an upscale neighborhood after the killer described his hatred for women as his motive for the crime. This led to mass feminist protests as well as South Koreans' own version of #MeToo. The move away from feminism isn't just at a social level. South Korean males also are against feminism's influence on their government. In 2017, the Ministry of Gender Equality, yes, that's a thing, launched a 5-year plan in hopes of increasing female representation in ministries, government enterprises, and public schools. In 2019, it was suggested that this plan be extended to incentivize large businesses to hire on more women as well. Since the Korean War, all able-bodied men age 18 to 35 have been required to join the military for a term of 21 to 24 months. While President Moon Jae-in has attempted to increase the numbers of women on active duty, females are still exempt from compulsory conscription. A survey of South Korean males in their 20s finds that 72% of them believe the male-only draft is a form of discrimination, and 65% believe women should also be conscripted into the military as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. So I just want to put something out there before we get really into this thing. I'm trying to find a South Korean native that currently lives in the country that would be willing to come on the show to talk about maybe a little bit more about the situation in Korea with regarding this story. So if there's anyone that knows a South Korean that speaks English that would be willing to come on, I would love to talk to them because I'd rather get it from the horse's mouth, in terms of this entire sort of rising conversation, than to hear from it from sources like CNN.
From fucking CNN, yeah. I had to kind of skip so much of this article because it's all done in that tone of, how can these guys not like feminism? It's the best thing ever.
Don't they know it's about equality? That these guys they must not know the definition. Let's tell them the definition again. So yeah.
It might be because they have run against organizations like I think it's pronounced WOMAD, not the music one, but the South Korean radical feminist organization WOMAD. And then
that's so
seriously,
perfect. It's so perfect.
It is. They didn't actually think about the fact that English for mad also is part of that word. They were combining woman and nomad. They split off from another
they should
South
call them
Korean
HOMAD, but anyway,
HOMAD.
Hose mad.
There you go. Another radical feminist community called I believe it's pronounced Megalia. It might be Megalia, but it's probably Megalia.
That's another portmanteau. I read it about
that
them.
one, if I remember right. Yeah. And it's actually from I think part of it's from the social media they were using, and the other part has something to do with a writing that they took a name from or something.
A feminist book.
Here we go. There's a Medium article. This is an extremist group, and they have been violent. There's been some. See if I can find any of the writings about any of the things they did, or if this is a article about somebody by somebody that likes them. Because these were basically rad femmes that did things like engaging in property damage and stuff like that. Oh, and they refer to men as bugs. They had statements in there. She's included things. Let me see if I can put this in our chat. Things like let's get an abortion if we become pregnant with a son, which is consistent with other rad fem groups.
Wow.
Calling men bugs. They also call them pigs and stuff like that. Which is consistent.
Imagine like if 4chan was a bunch of angry feminists, and that's Megalian.
Yeah, pretty much. And then, of course, then you have the WOMAD branching off from them and then becoming kind of just as bad. They're doing the same kind of, and of course they're doing the same kind of things in Korea that are being done in the United States by U.S. feminine, where they're trying to sort of take positions that they consider positions of power, and they don't think about the fact that they're positions of responsibility. So, I mean, it's no wonder there's an anti-feminist movement in South Korea. Like, that's what they have to deal with feminists. Rad femmes in a lot of Asian areas are more prevalent and more prominent and more out in the open than they are here. Here we have, quote, nice feminists for them to hide behind.
Yeah. Well, yeah, though this is pretty good. So, like, let me go back to this thing here. That study that you mentioned, 55%, right, of men say they don't support feminism, and 72% believe that the male-only draft is a form of gender discrimination. That sounds like they're really there's really a fight going on down there. Of course, unfortunately, the Me Too movement has also gone to South Korea. I met a guy, speaking of the Far East, or the Orient, or whatever you want to call it. I met a guy at the ICMI who actually traveled to Chicago from Japan to attend. Did you guys meet the Japanese guy? Because I know you were all there. Did you guys meet the Japanese guy?
I ended up not meeting a lot of people.
Anything.
Yeah, he was.
I ended up not meeting a lot of people because I was kind of stationary.
Yeah, I was like running around the whole time, but he approached me. I was introduced to him through someone else, but yeah. So he's very shy and soft spoken, but he actually also had a lot to say about the problems that he says in Japan. Feminism is extremely powerful political force. Fathers' rights there's a growing fathers' rights movement in Japan, and I think that it's just basically showing that these kinds of political revolutionary movements are spreading everywhere, and it's in the case of Japan, unfortunately. This gentleman said that there are no MRAs there, although he considers himself one, but he thinks that he's like the only one. Like, there are very few people that can speak up because they're too afraid. Because the thing is that there's an extremely more powerful than the feminist lobby is the traditionalist culture, the sort of conformist traditionalist culture of Japan. So it kind of keeps they both kind of keep MRAs there silent. Except for the father's rights stuff, which, the more sort of traditionalist angle, they're more open to having that discussion. So I do see this as a problem in the Far East, but in Korea, it was just, this is actually really interesting that people are fighting back, because we knew that there was an extremely powerful, extremely aggressive feminist lobby there, but we hadn't heard a lot about the kind of counter to that. Now, I got a link from my friend Nick Redding, who you guys might know from the Patriarchy Party in Edmonton, Men's Rights Edmonton. That was pretty in the news a lot, like a couple of years back. And he sent me a link to the Korean Reddit. Now, unfortunately, I don't use Google Chrome. I use Brave, and unfortunately, Brave doesn't have a translator, so I can't read anything that's on that website. This is the reason why I'm trying to get in touch with someone who speaks Korean. If you know someone who speaks Korean, or better yet is Korean, maybe you can put them in contact with me, leave a comment. I'd like to talk to someone. Maybe they can go on this Korean Reddit, because I heard, according to Nick and wherever he got it from, that in the Korean version of Reddit, there's a lot of sort of pro-men's issues and anti-feminist, conversations going on. So there's got to be someone on there that is an English speaker. So that's basically the main thing I wanted to say, is that this is of high interest to me. I think you guys would be interested as well. I'm gonna get the Japanese guy on at some point, but his English is pretty broken, so it's gonna be difficult to have a conversation. But I did manage to get an interview with him, and it'll go up soon, so just be on the lookout for that. Anyway, does anyone else have any other thoughts on this story?
I'm interested in this passage. Feminism grew rapidly in South Korea following the 2016 murder of a young woman in an upscale neighborhood after the killer described his hatred for women as his motive for the crime. This led to mass feminist protests, as well as South Korea's own version of Me Too. And it all sounds eerily familiar. Because if you ask a killer, why did you kill women? They might say, because I hate women. And then it's case closed. We've got our answer. The answer we're looking for. Because no one asks them if they also hate men too, even if they've killed men too, like Roger. But yet it's taken as proof of misogyny that you have that half of the story. But if you ask a killer, why did you kill men? Which most of them do, a lot of them will tell you, it's because you must not kill women. You must only kill men. And even though you already have your answer, it's not taken as misandry. Seems to be the same in every culture, because every culture has a version of gynocentrism, right?
Oh, absolutely. All right. Anyone else have any other thoughts on this? All right. So we're going to move on, but again, leave us your thoughts on this story. Have you seen, I don't know if any of you guys are involved or follow like Korean culture. I know it sounds really strange, but I know there are a lot of people that do, because it's kind of become really cool since K-pop became popular. So who knows? Maybe you know some specific stories you heard about in Korea. Maybe you know more about this murder that supposedly was the inspiration for, the impetus for this sudden rising feminist movement in Korea. Leave us your comments. I'd be interested in seeing what you guys have to say. So I have a super chat from the DCV Titan for $2 Canadian. He says, "Cogitate. We praising the omniscia." Okay, maybe I should have said cogitate. I don't know. I'm sorry. My words are not always the best. So we're going to move on to the next story. This is about the Petersons. Now, normally I wouldn't engage in discussing the issues of individuals because it comes across as kind of tabloidy and gossipy, but I thought that this was important to discuss, at least briefly, mainly because of the response to it. So Michaela Peterson, this Dr. Jordan Peterson's daughter, pictured there, published an update on her family situation in YouTube. Tammy, Jordan Peterson's wife, was diagnosed with a terminal cancer at the end of April of this year. After a surgical complication from a total kidney removal, they sought help in the U.S. Jordan Peterson went on an anti-anxiety drug called clonazepam to help deal with the stress. He then tried to quit cold turkey over the summer after Tammy recovered from complications with the surgery. Long story short, apparently you cannot cold turkey a drug like clonazepam. Jordan Peterson is now in rehab in New York to wean himself off of this drug. Tammy is featured in the video and is recovering and feeling much better now. Michaela said, quote, "He decided to check himself into a place because he didn't want to stress mom out. Wanted to get off of this as quickly as possible and honestly needs the medical help."
Yeah,
End quote.
there are two kinds of drugs you never do. Drugs that end in azepam and drugs you've never fucking heard of. And that's both. That's both of them right there.
Yeah.
Just about any medication that is intended to treat your mental state isn't something that you can just quit cold turkey for various reasons. Some of them have a bit of a physical addiction, but even a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, if you're accustomed to the effects of it and then you stop taking it immediately, it can be devastating to your emotional state. And that really is not good for somebody that's got, say, any kind of history of anxiety or anything like that. It's almost like taking a drug to cause the opposite problem, or to cause the problem that you were trying to treat. So I can't imagine. I think he probably should have known that. It's something I would. Isn't he? He's a psychology professor. He may not know a lot about specific drugs, but it would be unwise. Any kind of psychiatric medication, it would be unwise to just go off of it without speaking to a medical professional and being monitored for that very reason. There are people who go off things like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they were doing okay, and they go off the SSRI, and they commit suicide.
It's possible that the drug itself made him think that he could quit cold turkey while he was on it.
It wouldn't implant the idea, but it might make the idea not seem illogical when it actually is. That's just like people talk about SSRIs causing suicide and violence. They don't implant the ideas either.
Mm-hmm.
They're anti-anxiety drugs. So if your suicidal tendencies are due to something that's not, the drug is not successfully treating, but it does successfully treat your anxiety, then you stop fearing the consequences of committing suicide. Same thing with engaging in violence. So it presents a danger when somebody is just has this drug thrown at them and they're not monitored while they're on it, and they're not necessarily helped to identify whether they're still experiencing ideas and impulses that are damaging or dangerous.
Yeah. Well, my reason for picking this story is less about that. My understand, like, I don't know how he does his practice, but it seems to me, based on all of the lectures I've seen and I've read his book, and he's less about the medicine and more about like trying to, I don't know. He takes it from another angle, I guess. He says clinical psychologist, so that's
right.
what he does.
Yeah, they don't
So,
prescribe.
yeah, they typically don't prescribe. So, but the thing is, it's not really about him. It's just that what I saw when I heard about this, because I knew about his wife's terminal cancer, and then, if you guys don't know, Michaela Peterson, his daughter, the person who made the video, she was living with really, really bad, like, chronic pain when she was younger. There was all of these issues that she had with her physiology and so on, and she and depression and just, he had a really hard life. I mean, like a really hard life with his daughter's medical problems and then his wife's medical problems, and and then he becomes a public figure, and it's purely by chance. I mean, like, he had his content out there and he was making videos and stuff, but it wasn't like the same as once, he was like that famous viral video that put him in the public eye, where he's talking about free speech while on a college campus, while intersectional ideologues are trying to drown out the drown him out with like white noise generators and stuff, and that made him famous. And then he was put on every talk show where people tried to demonize him and ruin his reputation over and over. And he managed to endure all of that while dealing with all of his personal problems. And then this happens. His wife is diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And he's just a guy. That's how I see it. He's just a guy, and people are taking. There's Schadenfreude coming from his enemies online that this has happened, and they're celebrating this. Like they want the worst for this person, and I feel like I have to just not even defend the guy. Like I'm not a huge fan of Jordan B. Peterson. When I say that doesn't mean I dislike him. What I mean is I'm not like a blind cult member that follows him around and says he can do no wrong, right? I'm a person that thinks that what he has done for the world now that he's become a public figure is a net benefit, right? It's a net good. I mean, that's not the same as saying perfect. He has literally saved men from suicide, from radicalization, from self-destruction. He has saved men, probably more men than I have. So I'm grateful that he was doing the stuff that he did. And to see that, obviously, this is no surprise. When someone falls on hard times, there are people who are just in love with the idea that this person is suffering and that they can use this against them. Like, one of the arguments is, oh, I thought you were the self-help guy that, can, that always asks people to like pick themselves up and clean their rooms and wash their penis. And, then you can make things better. But here you are needing to rely on substances. And it's almost like you can't live up to your own standards. It's just insane stuff. No one is completely invulnerable. We know that he has had his struggles, just as we all have. Nope, nobody's ever made the claim that he's Jesus, right? And it just bothers me because I'm like, can we just leave the guy alone to like deal with his problems? And this is the thing. Go ahead, Mike.
And like Jordan, like Dr. House had his Vicodin, and Sherlock Holmes had his two-pipe problems, and the jury's still out as to what was in those pipes. And a lot of intellectuals need no intoxication whatsoever in order to work their magic. And you're still shopping around trying to find the right product for you. It'll be more difficult for you because you're not fictional like those other two examples I gave.
Mm-hmm.
But look further than the weird fucking chloroazepam or whatever you're doing. There's easier solutions, bro. Smoke a bowl. Have you tried DMT? Jamie, pull that up.
I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, the medication he was on is not one that's normally used in the long term, and actually none of the type. It's of a type called. Let's see if how badly I can screw this up. Benzodiazepines. Nope, there's no R in there. Benzodiazepines, or
they're commonly just called benzos.
Yep, they're also commonly, and Xanax is one of those, but that's not what he was on. What he was on, I think, is commonly marketed as Klonopin. But in any case, these are drugs that you are prescribed when you are going through something abnormally hard to deal with, or when you have ended up in a situation where you have a chemical imbalance to deal with. And the fact that Peterson talks about the idea that when you are dealing with an ordinary problem, you don't need to take extraordinary measures like drugs, does not eliminate the ability to deal with an extraordinary problem by taking measures that are suited to that problem. Talking about proportion doesn't eliminate the ability to deal with things that are out of proportion to your normal life experiences. Personally, I think that drugs like this should be a last resort. I think all psychiatric medicine should be the thing that they try after nothing else helps enough. Unless they're in a situation where they're dealing with somebody that has hallucinations and things like that are obviously and overtly caused by a chemical imbalance that can be corrected, or a chemical issue that can be corrected. When you're just dealing with a situation where somebody comes in and they have a whole lot of stressors in their life and they're trying to work through those stressors, I wouldn't, considering all the things we know now about these medications, I wouldn't want somebody handing them over to me again. And in my experience with this kind of thing is from the patient end.
Yeah.
I went through that process of, well, you got to take these pills to breathe, and you got to take these pills to not sneeze yourself to death, and you got to take these pills to keep from being in such a oxygen deprived state that you can't do anything. You got to use these inhalers in case of an emergency, and you got to use these other inhalers when the allergens in the air get too high, and so on. And pretty soon there's a whole lot of side effects going on in there. And well, here's some pills for those side effects, right? And gee, those pills cause side effects too. How about some pills for those side effects? Oh, those pills cause side effects? Well, here's another set of pills. And the next thing I knew, I'm on like 15 pills and 4 inhalers a day. It's kind of expensive, and it also really sucks in a physical way. It's definitely not fun. And it took 10 years to get the steroids out of my system. Took 10 years for me to get into a mental state that didn't include problems caused by having too many steroids in your system. And during that 10 years, we all thought I was bipolar. And it took a few years after the steroids were out of my system for my medical team to figure out that diagnosis was incorrect, and I really didn't need to be taking the drugs for bipolar disorder, and they were making me sick. And I take 2 allergy pills a day now when things get really bad, and the rest of the year I take 1 allergy pill a day, and I'm not prescribed anything else, and I wouldn't ask to be prescribed anything else. And I think in some people's situation, you don't really have a lot of choice. When you're in an emergency, you deal with the emergency, just like you get a cast if you have a broken leg. It's not wrong to get a cast if you have a broken leg, even if it's wrong to sit on your ass because you overworked your muscles one day and they're sore. But at the same time, I think most people are in that situation of sitting on their ass because they overwork their muscles too much and they're sore. And that needs to, the idea that we're going to put a cast on those people all the time is pretty dumb. The same thing is true with psychiatric medications, and it needs to stop. I think it's one of the reasons why we have so much teen violence and teen suicide, is because rather than dealing with teen issues, their parents and their medical practitioners are throwing pills at them and saying, take this and go sit in your room and leave me alone. So I don't really think this is a very big gotcha for Mr. Peterson's
No, it's not.
opponents. I
No.
think they're criticizing him for doing what he has advocated, which is keep the tools you use proportionate to the problems that you're trying to solve with them.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
a lot of people deliberately misunderstood that.
Yeah, no, I think it clearly is deliberate because they want to throw it in his face because they're arguing against a straw man. But more than that, the reason why I also bring this up, aside from the fact that I do think that he has done a net good, a net positive for men, okay, specifically, but that not uniquely, is also that this is an example of a man that is trying to cope with problems in his life, and he is aware of his vulnerabilities, has done the work that was needed to cope, with all of the pressure that he's got to deal with, right? From the sickness with his wife to the problems with his daughter, which, they're being addressed, but you always have that, when you have a daughter and that she needed like a hip replacement, and an ankle replacement because of all of these problems that she had, and she's somehow managed to, pull herself out of it by changing her diet, which is something that for the most it's kind of it's not like 100% science, but it seems to be working for her. So he's like watching that, and he's got the problems with his daughter, and then of course there's all the stuff that he wants to do and his practice. I mean, all of this stuff is just piling up, and he decides, okay, the degree to which I'm able to endure all of this without any assistance from the outside, even though my wife has my back, and she has since high school, and even though my daughter has my back, there's a limit, I'm getting to that limit, and now I think I need additional help. So I'm going to go get some medication to help me with this, right? This is all new. I've become a public figure basically overnight in a few years, if you think about it. He hasn't been around for that long. And then that puts him in a position where he has to check into rehab to wean himself off the drug, which, by the way, is a responsible thing to do if you're afraid you're going to get addicted to something that you started only because you wanted to take care of a problem, right? It's a responsible thing to say, I'm going to check myself into rehab to get this out of my system. It's not, when you hear this person check themselves into rehab, it puts images in people's minds that he was running in the streets in his underwear on PCP, flipping over cars, when that's not what happened, right? So
But can we take a second to imagine how cool that would be?
I was just thinking that.
In San Diego.
Yeah, right. So again, and he was never against the idea of using drugs to help. His whole philosophy was, and I agree with this, and I've said this before I even knew who he was. What can you control? Work on that first, and then as you figure out what is out of your control, take steps to try to address those things. But don't jump to whatever what you might think is the easiest way out. Try to fix the things that you can, that that you have. This is what clean your room means, right? It's like work at the smallest level, and then, what can I control? And then work out from there. It's like the difference between going on a diet and, to lose weight, and just skipping ahead to the gastric bypass surgery or getting your stomach stapled. Like, before you do those extreme things, how about eat only 3 meals a day? That's basically what it is. It's like, start with the things that you can control and then go from there. And when you get to a point where you're like, okay, I've done everything, I've done all the work, but there's still more, I think I may need to do this. That's all it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not hypocritical. It's none of those things. And so when people jump on that, what they're telling me is, and this is, I think you guys know this, but I'm just going to communicate it anyway, is that they don't want men to express their vulnerability or their weakness. They are actually proponents of the toxic masculinity that they claim to be against, because when a man says, I can't do this despite the fact that I've done all these other things, so I'm going to go and get some additional help, and then after it's over, I'm aware that this will have side effects, so I'm going to do the responsible thing, and I'm going to wean myself off of this because, and he specifically said this, I don't want to stress my wife out by staying on it, right? So when they do that, it's all responsible from what I can tell. I don't see anything crazy going on here. And then they jump on that, and they're just trying to get a gotcha on the professor. It just tells me that these people don't care about male vulnerability when they actually express it. And that's what's happening, right? So, that's basically what my takeaway are those things. So at the end of the day, I don't see a reason to shame Peterson. He's done nothing wrong from what I can tell. He's never been inconsistent on, using psychiatric assistance, like in the form of pills. Maybe the one he took, I don't know much about it. I don't think that's relevant. So when you, if a man decides that he needs a little extra help, there should be no shame in that. But apparently the people who don't like him, and most of them tend to be these kind of intersectional feminist types that believe in concepts of toxic masculinity. In fact, they think that he promotes toxic masculinity because he asks people to be stoic when it suits them, because to do otherwise is just not helpful. They're basically saying that they are okay with it because they think that he should just not have done that and should just stuck it out. And it just shows that they're hypocrites and they don't actually care about men. So
it actually, his experience and his response to it proves him right about not making drugs your first response to anxiety and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The fact that withdrawal can happen with these things says a lot. Obviously this is some serious shit. It's messing with not just your thoughts, right, but your actual physical body. It's making changes in your brain. You don't understand for the most part if you're not really sort of a habitual studier of things like that, I guess. Just, this is what happens with your brain and this is what happens with your liver and blah, blah, blah. If you don't find everything like that fascinating, you might not realize your brain doesn't heal the way the rest of your body does. If you change it, it's not going to just flip right back when you go off the medication. If you damage it, you may never get it back. It doesn't. It's like cutting something off. It's not like bruising or cutting or breaking. It's just the function can be just gone. And there are miraculous workarounds that can happen with stroke patients and stuff like that. But if you do damage to it, you're taking the risk that none of that will happen. That none of those miracles are going to be your case. And with a drug like this, that like the withdrawal symptoms aren't just minor things either. Like there are some minor things, headaches, stomach pain, and stuff like that. But if you get to the bottom of the list, it has depression, seizures, and thoughts of suicide. So it really can have a profound effect on the function of your brain. Like, you don't have seizures because you're tired. You have seizures because you've had a profound chemical change in your brain. That's very different. And obviously, if something can do that to you, it shouldn't be your first course of action if you have depression and anxiety. It should be the thing you do when nothing else is enough.
Yeah. All right, so I got a super chat and then move on to the last story. But, I hope that Peterson has a good recovery and that him and his family are okay. Polaris589 gives us $5 and says, "Hello, Mike J. I got the Save California shirt, came in the mail yesterday." And then he gives us another $5, which he just gave us. He says, "Also, Hannah, I'll be at a concert this Sunday. I'll have to miss D&D." Oh, that's a shame.
Dude, you got the t-shirt. That's fucking great, man. That's so
Yes.
cool. I saw one of those on Matt Christensen's Sunday show the other week. And when I get a little bit more scratch saved up, I totally want one of those shirts because it looks badass.
So now you have to come back and tell us all about the concert.
There you go. But you have to do it in character. Okay, so...
Oh, God. Yes, do that.
All right, so let's move on to the last story. This one is the most brilliant troll I've ever seen. So we're going to be talking about how Islam is right about women. Mike J, could you please?
Oh, I will. So overnight, dozens, if not hundreds, of flyers have shown up in the town of Winchester, Massachusetts. The unassuming white flyers feature plain black text that conveys a very straightforward message of only 5 words. Islam is right about women. If this happening reminds you of the "It's okay to be white" poster campaign, it should. All sides point to website 4chan as being the source of both poster campaigns. While the "It's okay to be white" flyers had a much easier time achieving their desired effect, the new posters have Winchester locals a little confused. One such resident, Dorothy Kruger, states, quote, "I assume it's negative. That's not cool. That's not a cool thing to do," end quote. Another resident...
Don't they say assuming makes an ass out of you and me. And if you're doing it in a negative way, just for the sake of assuming things in a negative way, then at some point you have to ask yourself if you're the one with the problem, because you're going around assuming shit is negative.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of this is basically putting up the flyers and then sort of analyzing people's take on it, and the take of it is kind of the, I hate to use the word taken, the takeaway. It's, well, what how do you perceive this message? And then you listen to someone's reaction, and then you get, oh, that's what they're doing. That's what they're going for.
Well, if they
Another
say it's
resident.
misogyny, they sound like Islamophobes. If they say it's Islamophobia, they sound like misogynists. They don't know how to put it together. It's so beautiful. I'm going to have to do a video about this at some point, even though the story is already stale, because it's just so delicious in a disgusting way. It's why it's being compared to the "it's okay to be white" thing, because it's just found the shortest possible sentence that will screw with these people's brains. You know?
Yes, it's perfect. It's even better than "it's okay to be white." It's even better than that. But go ahead, Mike.
Incidentally, what's everyone's answer here? Because mine is Islam is wrong about women, and Islam is wrong about men, and Islam is wrong about a whole fucking bunch of things. And I reckon it's consistent. Don't know about you.
Shorten it to 3 words: Islam is wrong.
There you go. All
Islam isn't even consistent. There's a whole bunch of different factions of it. Just like with Christianity, we call it denominations, and they all have names, and everybody knows a host of those names. But we don't necessarily have that with Islam. Like, there are factions, and they all have names, but I'll bet most people would be lucky to name 2 of them, the 2 that are the most well known. So when you talk about it, which one are you talking about? I think this was great because it gets people arguing about something that none of them really know what they're arguing about, except for maybe the imam, who at least knows about his sect of it and what everything they teach and what his opinions on that are. But I mean, for Pete's sake, they can't even, like, if you get the left upset about it, they can't even really criticize it because they have to stick with their claim that there's nothing wrong with Islam. And of course, if you get the right talking about it, then you have this. They don't really have the opinions on women that the left attribute to them, but they're going to say a bunch of hypocritical things anyway. So, I mean, now somebody's got to be sitting back and laughing their asses off on this.
Plenty of
I hope
people.
they got to see a lot of the responses.
Well, let's keep going and find out what they are. Mike J, if you could.
Why, yes. Another resident, Stacy Irizarry, states, quote, "I think someone just wanted this to happen, right? To get some kind of response. The sign itself is confusing. It's subject to interpretation. And oh man, she is dangerously close to hitting the nail on the head."
It's almost as though they're trying to have this conversation. You know, that thing that all the SJWs say, that it's very important to have these conversations, but not that conversation.
Even Shakil Rahman, who is an imam of the Islamic Center of Burlington, doesn't quite know what to make of the posters, stating, quote, "What is the intent behind it, and what are we trying to prove by putting it on a poll so ambiguously? There is not a lot of clarity in it. I hope the person was trying to encourage people to look it up maybe, or research it." Despite multiple calls to the authorities concerning the posters, Winchester police say there isn't much they can do. While posting anything on a street sign is technically illegal, it is a nearly impossible law to enforce. However, the authorities say the incident is being investigated. Probably
Isn't
because
there
they have
something
to.
in, I believe it's the First Amendment itself, about freedom of religion? They for all they know, it was Muslims posting those perfectly neutrally graphic posters saying Islam is right about women. Why on earth would you not allow a Muslim to do that? Surely
because
that,
they were
Go on.
posting it on street signs, and you can't put anything covering a street sign. It is against the law. However, in the same article, they basically say that, yeah, this is really hard to enforce, though, because it would be like someone putting up a lost cat poster. As long as it's not a direct call to violence, there's really nothing that they can or really, frankly, care like doing about it.
And it's
Yes,
not. It's
but
like
if
it's like a poster saying Jesus is right about women. Who's going to complain about that? Apart from the SJWs, I'm saying.
there you go. Actually, they shouldn't complain about it either if they know their Bible. But you have to be careful about those signs about lost pets. If you see signs advertising, who to call for if your lost pet has been spotted in your neighborhood, you definitely should be watching out for low men in yellow coats.
I appreciate that reference. I just want to tell you, I was a fan of Hearts in Atlantis and Stephen King in general.
Back in the day when he was still cool.
Yes, way back in the day.
Well, I think that this is brilliant. I think this is brilliant, and my answer kind of falls in line with Dr. Ranamakam's. It's wrong about women, and it's wrong about men, and also Islam's. If you asked a woman in Islam if it was right about women, the women would tell you yes. So you might want to ask yourself, why is that? So being open to interpretation, as that woman describes it, is sort of like a way of her saying, well, I don't know what they're getting at. It's like, no, they're just making a statement. You just don't know how to tackle it. But what you probably should do is think to yourself, if you actually did the work, people not in Islam will say it's wrong about women, but people in Islam, including women, say it's right about women. And so if they're saying that, then you have to ask yourself why. Because one of the things that this reveals for people who actually follow it through to its logical conclusion is not just the cognitive dissonance that is in those 5 words that SJWs will not be able to rationalize, but that it goes even further than that within Islamic culture itself, it is supported, it is not run by the men at the expense of the women, but rather it is inhabited by both men and women, most of whom support it. So you have to ask yourself then, if it's right about women, is that really bad if those women are okay with it? I mean, like, as a person on the inside. And so, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's an even more interesting statement than even like the people who made it. I don't know if they were thinking this, but even the people who made it may have intended.
I think the people who made it were more intent on getting people to just shit themselves over it, trying to figure out what the hell it was about and see how many people took it like that one Dorothy Kruger. I assume it's negative. That's not cool. That's not a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
Where she just like imposed her own perceptions on this piece of paper with black and white, imagery on it. That's text that negative or positive. It might be one or the other, and she had no idea, but she took it that way and then got mad. It's just coincidental that I'm doing a show on that kind of behavior among women on Thursday. plug.
I think if anything, it proves, or at least shows evidence, that women are wrong about Islam.
I hate to say it, but women are wrong about a lot of things, especially when they're in the mind of men. Anything that women are considering to be men's thoughts, for the most part, as a group, women are wrong. Whatever you think men are thinking, you're wrong. And whatever reasons you think are behind the things that men do, you're probably wrong about that too, especially if you get mad about it. And it's one of the dumb jokes that goes around on the internet was 50 things men wish women knew about men, and it was probably originally like a BuzzFeed article or something. And I remember reading it, and there was one on the list. If we say something and there are 2 ways you can take it, and one of them makes you feel bad, We meant the other one. And most people should be able to figure that out for the most part. Like, that should be the default. But I can't count how many times I've seen or heard women, and I've had to control it in myself, so it must be an instinct. I turn around and assume the other one, and then get mad over it, and then blame the guy because of what they were thinking. So yeah, that just struck a chord right there. I'm assuming it's negative. That's not cool. That's not a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
No, you're an idiot.
Well, that's the thing. I want to see what happens. I was trying to find a sound effect that best exemplifies what would go through the minds of people who would read that sign. It probably goes something like this.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
that's perfect.
When you first did that, Brian, I thought I'm like, oh God, did Hannah's computer shut down again?
No.
Oh, that's what that was. Yeah. It's like the auditory accompaniment to the meme with the slightly older woman with the math symbols floating around her face.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
No, it's probably the sound of me getting banned from Twitter for I don't know, razzing that Echoplex media guy that keeps following us all around there by calling him a creepy stalker.
That guy is a stalker. He's like used
Yeah,
multiple
he's
accounts
not-
to talk about us on Facebook and
But he's too
Twitter.
incompetent to be creepy. He's just a dumb stalker.
yeah. It's kind of like being.
If I can,
Go ahead.
I'm gonna say it. It's Okay to Be White was a better campaign just because of the more explosive visceral reaction. I really hope that this was just one town. It's Okay to Be White was several places.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that this was a test run, because I believe the plan, if there is such a thing as an organized plan for this, it was going to follow in the footsteps of the It's Okay to Be White thing, where they did it on Halloween. So, like I said, fingers crossed it was a dry run, and we'll hopefully see the real one come next Halloween.
Yeah.
I prefer the idea that it's implosive rather than explosive. That when you deploy this one, it kind of implodes as quickly as possible because the media don't want to touch it. And I kind of don't want to see what happens if it does explode. It could start a race war.
Islam is right about women?
Yeah, because the Muslims will get in on it.
Yeah, I don't think that the U.S. has a really big Muslim population. I know that, like, in the UK,
but if it
you guys
spreads
do.
over here, we're in trouble. That's
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
yeah. You guys, you guys might have problems for sure.
It's bigger than people think because the growth of the Muslim population in the U.S. isn't necessarily an all immigration thing.
No. It's a religion
we have,
thing.
Yeah, we've also got a population of people who became Muslims as part of their activism during the civil rights era, and then raised families, and they're Muslims as well, but they're definitely a different brand or breed or whatever you want to consider it, denomination, whatever term you want to use. They're a different sect than that any of the types that have emigrated into the United States, as it's very Americanized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really just comes down to how fundamentalist they are and how long they've been here and that kind of thing. I mean, we definitely have it in the States, but I think that religion-wise, we're still primarily a Christian country. So, is there any other thoughts on this story or any of the other stories that we've covered today? No. Okay. Well, then I got a couple super chats, I think. Yes, we do, and we will close out the show and go into the after show. So, let's see, we got Schrodinger's cat who gives us £5 and says, "I would love to see those signs posted in Jess Phillips's constituency. Alas, I don't live in Birmingham."
Birmingham Yardley. I don't know where Yardley is. It's a piece of Birmingham.
Egregious Charles gives us $10 and says they're confused because they don't know who's posting it. If it's a brown Muslim, they can say nothing. If it's a white non-Muslim, it's misogynistic and Islamophobic. And Anth Bobo gives us $2 Canadian and says the truth is the West is wrong about women. Okay, so
Yeah.
Well, there is that too.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I think most cultures are still at least a little bit wrong about women.
Mm-hmm.
That's why this is such an uphill battle we're fighting here, folks.
That's true.
You don't know how to radio and so on and so forth.
Every culture that is wrong about men is also wrong about women.
Yep. So with that said, we are going to wrap up the show. I want to thank Mike J and Stapler and Andrew for the write-ups for today's stories. I want to thank Mike J, Hannah, and Mike for coming on. I want to thank you guys especially for joining us, because otherwise we'd be shouting into the void. And if you guys could please give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, leave us a comment, and hit the bell for notifications. We're going to be heading into the after show. We're going to be listening to this podcast from Slate's Man Up. I guess it's the Man Up podcast. I don't know. And it's entitled The Real Threat of Video Games. White supremacists see male gamers as recruits. What does that say about gamer culture? I'm really interested in seeing what the argument's gonna be. So no, wait, where did my stories go? Hold on a second. Gotta change the websites because for some reason it changed that as well.
We're basically ending the show right here.
Yeah, we are, but I wanted to I wanted to end it with the audience. I don't think that was a good sign out. So
Yeah, no,
let's see.
they're saying F for. It says it cut out.
I'm streaming, but it's not picking
Yeah.
up.
Well, at least we made it to the end of the show before it did it this time. Than halfway through.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's it.
Stop the audacity.
Yep.
Yeah.